អង្គុយចុះ
The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. We would like now to hand over to counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea to pose questions to the witness. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to everyone in and around the courtroom, and especially good morning to you, Mr. Kim Voon. Before I start, Mr. President, a slight point of clarification. The defense teams had been given a total of 0.75 days. Am I correct in understanding that the defense teams as a whole will have until 12 o'clock today to question this witness? That would be the basis on which I proceed. My colleague, Mr. Carnavas, will not have more than 30 minutes of questioning, and I myself also intend to use no more than 30 minutes of questioning.
The President, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Kim Voon, thank you for being with us these days. I understand it is not easy for you, and as I announced, I assume that we will be finishing your questioning this morning. I will be speaking slowly for the benefit of my French colleagues, but also for the benefit of the translators. And I would first like to ask some follow-up questions on some of the things you have told the prosecution yesterday. Mr. Kim Voon, you have earlier testified that at a certain moment, Yoon Yat controlled both the Ministry of Propaganda and Education and the Ministry of Education. Do you remember, Mr. Kim Voon, around which year Yoon Yat started to control these two ministries?
Response. I do not remember precisely, but she could have been controlling this institution between 1977 or 1978.
And to your knowledge, Mr. Kim Voon, did Yoon Yat stay in charge of these two ministries until the Vietnamese arrived in January 1979?
Response. Yes, she did. She stayed in charge until then.
Mr. Voon, we have talked about your transfer to the Kampuchea Krom radio station. The prosecution has asked some questions on this topic already, but do you remember when you were transferred to head this radio station?
Response. It was in 1978, so far as I recollect.
In your statement before the co-investigating judges, you stated, and I quote from document E3/381, and the English ERN is 003655526. Khmer ERN is 003572003, and French ERN is 00402 996. And on the page with ERN number 00365528, and that has the Khmer ERN number 00357205. You state, and I quote, "After my wife was arrested in late 1977, they transferred me to work as the chairman of the Kampuchea Krom radio program back under the Ministry of Propaganda and Education." You just told us that you think that you were transferred to become the head of the radio station in 1978. And in this statement before the co-investigating judges, you state that it happened after your wife was arrested in late 1977. It is, of course, possible that it was 1978, considering the answer that you gave to the co-investigating judges. But could you clarify for us today whether or not you indeed transferred in 1978, or could it possibly have been late 1977?
Response. Allow me to clarify that when I was first transferred, I did not hold any position as yet. But by 1978, the programs were created and I was installed as the chairman of the Cambodia Krom radio program. Before that, there was no clear distinction concerning the programs. In late 1977, I was transferred there, but I did not have any position clearly, and I had to write programs. But later on, only when in 1978 that I became the chairman of the radio program.
Thank you for that answer. You have also stated that this Kampuchea Krom radio station fell under the responsibility of the Ministry of Propaganda and Education. Is that correct?
Response. Yes, it is.
Yesterday, when the OCP asked you a few questions on the Kampuchea Krom radio station, the following was said. It is on page 37 of the English draft transcript, and it's on page 30 of the Khmer draft transcript. And I quote first the question by the prosecutor: "When you were the chairman of that program, were you working in one of the ministries in Phnom Penh or elsewhere?" And you answered, "I worked all along in the propaganda ministry. The difference is that I worked in different section of the ministry." End of your answer. My question to you, Mr. Kim Voon, is when you went to work at the Kampuchea Krom radio station, did you actually move to a different location, either to a different building or to a different part of the same building that you were working in before?
Response. First, as indicated, I had to be attached to both sides, and there was no clear distinction of my duty. I had to perform my task for both functions. But in 1978, our offices were split. Although the radio program were the common or joint program, we had to broadcast Khmer, English and Vietnamese language programs. and also the Cambodia Crown programs were part of the daily programs, and we had a separate section after all.
And just so I understand your answer correctly, you say that your offices were split. Did that mean that there was actually a physical relocation of a certain number of people to a different building?
Response: yes, it is correct.
And when you were working in that building, you were spending less time, by force of logic, in the original Ministry of Propaganda. Is that a fair assumption?
Response: yes, it is.
Moving on to a next topic, Mr. Kim Voon. You were asked yesterday by the prosecutor about the role of Nguyen Chia at the propaganda office. And I will quote again from the transcript. It is page 36 of the English transcript, and it's page 29 of the Khmer transcript. And I will first quote the question by the prosecutor. You also stated in your previous interviews that there was a time when Nguyen Chia was in charge of the propaganda office. Is that correct? And you answer, as a matter of fact, the leadership role was not his task. Mr. Kim Voon, do you stand by that statement today that the leadership role at the Ministry of Propaganda was not Nguyen Chia's task?
Response: and that only when Mrs. Yonyat was present that he would come and replace her. And with regard to the agriculture programs, he would be the one who was in charge.
I will later ask you a few more questions about the agricultural programs. I first want to ask you a different question. I just read out to you the question that was posed to you by the prosecution. And I will read out the question once more so you understand what I'm talking about. The question by the prosecution was, you also stated in your previous interviews that there was a time when Nguyen Chia was in charge of the propaganda office. Is that correct? End of quote. This was the question that was put to you by the prosecution. Mr. Kim Voon, my question to you today is the following. Did you ever tell investigators of the OCIJ that Nguyen Chia was in charge of the propaganda office?
Response: I used to say that, but I was saying that he came only to replace Yonyat when she was absent.
And do you remember what you told the investigators about the role of Nguyen Chia at the propaganda office when he was there?
Response. I do not remember what he did before that, but Mr. Nuon Chea did not work at the ministry on a permanent basis, and no other ministers would be assigned permanently for the position other than Mrs. Yon Yat. So when Yon Yat was not present, and Nuon Chea would be taking her position.
Mr. Kim Woon, did you tell the investigators of the OCIJ that Nuon Chea was mainly involved in education and that this education related mostly to agriculture?
Response. The new education programs were about agriculture. It is correct.
Yesterday, when you were questioned by Judge Lavergne, you spoke about the agriculture programs, or about the education programs at first. And I would like to quote from the transcript, yesterday's transcript. It's page 69 in English and page 55 in Khmer. Judge Lavergne asked you, this morning you told us that Nuon Chea only came on an intermittent basis. So can you tell us a bit more about what Nuon Chea was doing at the Ministry of Propaganda and Education? And your answer was, actually, Mr. Nuon Chea had a role in the education program. The education program was on agriculture. A bit further down, Judge Lavergne asked you, and I quote, did he replace Mrs. Yon Yat, or did he simply come to assist her, let's say? And your answer was, his fundamental program was the new education on agriculture, and I have no other knowledge of his involvement in other sections in writing, in particular because I had been transferred to the Kampuchea Krom radio section when Mr. Nuon Chea was assigned to the propaganda department. End of quote. So yesterday you told us that Nuon Chea's fundamental program was the new education on agriculture, and that you have no other knowledge of his involvement in other matters, in particular because I had been transferred to the Kampuchea Krom radio section. Mr. Kim Woon, my question today is it a fair assumption on my part that you indeed did not know about the other tasks of Mr. Nuon Chea because you had been transferred to a different building where you spent a lot of time?
Response. Yes, it is correct to say so.
So, Mr. Kim Woon, you have stated yesterday, when you were questioned by Judge Lavergne, that Mr. Nuon Chea was involved in the education section relating to agriculture. You spoke a little bit about what you remembered about this agriculture program, but in English, the English transcript is not entirely clear if you compare it to the Khmer transcript. For the benefit of all the parties, could you tell us a bit more about the particulars of this agriculture program that Nguyen Chia was involved in?
Actually, the agricultural education was disseminated with the training manual, and so there was a copies of documents, and that was recorded before it was broadcast. And the source of the document was taken from the rice experiment or research center based in Battambang. There was a Chinese expert who prepared this training manual and information booklet for agricultural program.
Mr. Kim Phoon, in your statements before the OCIJ, you do not seem to mention the fact that the education by Nguyen Chia focused on agriculture. In fact, the entire word agriculture is not mentioned in your statement. The statement that you signed and that you stand by. Do you know why the fact that the education by Nguyen Chia focused on agriculture is not mentioned in the statements that we have of you by the co-investigating judges?
I do not recall it. They did not ask me about that, so I did not answer to that effect. But later on, they asked us about education in general, education program. And at that time, we also had a program focusing on agricultural education. The investigator at that time did not dwell on the agricultural education or the issue as such. They only asked me about the role of Mr. Nguyen Chia in relation to Ministry of Propaganda. And then I responded that the task of propaganda was part of his education too.
And just to be clear, and it is simply to avoid confusion, do you remember whether or not you mentioned agriculture in your testimony before the co-investigating judges?
I do not really recall that. I did not know when you are referring to, which interview you are referring to.
I apologize if it's unclear. I'll try to make it more simple. Do you remember whether or not you told the investigators that Nguyen Chia's involvement in education related to agriculture.
As far as the interviews with the court staff, I did mention about agriculture because they asked me Mr. Nguyen Chia's involvement with the Ministry of Propaganda, and I told them that he went there because there was a new education programs relating to agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Kim Voon. I have no further questions. For the record, I note that indeed the word agriculture does not appear in your statements before the OCIJ, and we will be asking for a transcription of your interview with the investigators. For today, I thank you very much for coming. Again, it must be difficult, and on behalf of the Nguyen Chia defense team, I wish you well. Thank you.
The President, thank you. I now hand over to the defense team for Mr. Ieng Sari to put the questions to the witness. You may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to everyone in and around the courtroom. And good morning, sir. My name is Michael Carnavas, and with Mr. Angodom, we represent Mr. Ieng Sari. I have very few questions, mostly for clarification purposes. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. My first question relates to your second statement that you gave on 28 July 2009, and I will be referring to document E3/381, page 4 in English. The Khmer ERN number is 00357206-07. The French is 00402998-999. In English, it's 00365229. Now, in your statement, a question is posed to you, and this is where I need some clarification. You're asked, you have said that leaflets have been dropped before Sao Pim was arrested. Where were the leaflets published? And then you give your answer. Now, we've listened to the interview that you gave. It's 48 minutes, 31 seconds long, of a 2-hour interview, according to the summary provided by the investigators. We don't know what was said during the missing unrecorded period. But nowhere in the tape do you previously mention leaflets. May I ask, when did you mention the leaflets for the first time to the investigators that came to speak with you?
It has been a long time. I cannot recall everything. But to my recollection, I did mention something about leaflet. But precisely when, I do not recall.
Thank you very much. Well, now, if we look at your other statement, which is E3 E3/380, we see that that statement began at 8:50 in the morning. It ended at 2:30 in the afternoon. So it took approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. Yet the audio recording for that interview is 2 hours and 47 minutes and 22 seconds long. May I ask, in the two statements that you gave, were conversations held with the investigators where they asked you questions, you provided answers, before actually being tape recorded with questions and answers?
I did not understand how they arranged the recording at that time. I paid attention to only the question asked, and I merely responded to the questions, but asked for the recordings or the preparation of the records of that interview. I did not pay particular attention to it.
Thank you. Well, let me ask you, since it began at 8:50 in the morning and it ended at 12:30, and nothing in what we have here in the statement, which is E3/381, notes that there was a break, that you took a break during the questioning session. Did the questioning actually begin when they first met you and ended at 2:30 in the afternoon, as is noted in the summary?
That I am not clear. I did not really understand the recording procedures as well as the record-keeping procedures.
Well, one final question on this. Did at any point they tell you, now we're going to start recording? Or was it your assumption that everything was being recorded from the moment that you met them, if you recall?
That could have been the case, but I do not understand the technical particularity of that procedure. I only responded to the questions.
And one final question about both interviews. During the interviews, did they share with you documents for you to look at and for you to refresh your memory, if you recall?
At the time, they could have given me a document, but the interview took a rather long time, so I did not comprehend all the documents. I only recall some of the names of individuals who worked at the Department of Propaganda, and one of my colleagues was not a cadre. She was only an ordinary staff member, but I failed to make that rectification on the record because the interview took rather long, so I was too exhausted at that time to bother to rectify it.
And one final question on this issue, just to follow up. When you indicated that you did not remember, did at that point, do you recall whether they showed you documents to see whether that would assist your memory of the events?
Generally, they offer me a copy, but I did not go through that document thoroughly, and once I did not examine it thoroughly.
Thank you. Now let me move to my last topic. It should be very brief. You were questioned when you first came by the President concerning whether it was 2 interviews or 3 interviews, and I want some clarification on that because we do have 2 statements, but on page, in Khmer it would be 34 to 35, English it would be 40 to 41, and French it would be 45 to 47 of the transcript of the 21st of August. You said, I had given 3 interviews, however, there were only 2 official documents recording these interviews. And then further down, you do say that on the 3rd occasion, I was attending a workshop on planning and development, and the investigators could not wait for me, and they had to come back to do or to perform other tasks instead. So I just want to make sure that that we all understand. Was it that you met with them 3 times, but only twice you were interviewed? Or you actually interviewed 3 times, but only twice recorded?
As I said earlier on, there were 3 interviews undertaken, but only 2 were recorded with document.
All right. Well, let me ask you then to clarify a point on the 3rd interview. Did they ask you questions, and did you provide answers on that 3rd interview, which was not tape recorded and for which we do not have a statement, a summary, if you recollect?
In the 3rd interview, to be honest, there was some controversy in it because I was very busy at the times, and the investigator went there to meet me. So I had to decide in between my personal work and the work of the ECCC. I know that these 2 things were important. I asked them to wait for me, but since the investigator were less patient, they could not wait for me. So the investigators from the office of OCIJ, one of whom was a foreigner, he might have been upset with me. We did not get along well with each other in the last interview. He contempted me, threatening to bring me, using public force to bring me to Phnom Penh. I think that that was his technical things or so, and I told him that how could you use public force to arrest me or to force me to come, because I did not commit any crimes, I did not do anything wrong. So at that time that was the controversy, but I did not know the particular nationality of that foreign investigator. I was not afraid. I was not afraid of anything because I did not do anything wrong, because I did not believe that there was any ground for my arrest or so. But then he composed himself, saying that he was just joking. But I was rather serious, because I think that the work of the court was not something to be taken lightly. That could have been that reason. That's why I did not affix my thumbprint to that record. And I did not know who was who actually among those investigators, but I only noticed that he was a foreigner. And I did not even notice which teams he came from either. But it was the 3rd interviews I had with them. And I told them that I had already given the previous two interviews, so my letter response would not differ anything from the previous two interviews. It would be likely to be the same.
Thank you very much. Now, I just need a couple of more points of clarification in light of what you just told us. When the international investigator for the core investigative judge office was threatening you, was that during the second interview or the third interview?
It was in the third interview, and he was not the previous investigator who conducted interview with me.
Okay, thank you. And did you get along with the previous interviewer, the previous international investigator? Because now I'm a little confused.
I did not have any problem with the previous investigators. He was rather polite, courteous. But I remember that he was of black nationality. I did not know his particular nationality, but I got along well with him. But the later investigator, I did not know what his nationality was, but I did not really get along well with him.
Okay, thank you. Now, on the third interview, I know you've told us about this exchange, but did you answer any questions at the time, or did the meeting the questioning never took place because you were busy and they had to go their way?
At that time, I was very busy. Actually, it was not on the working day. I asked him whether or not he could come on Saturday or Sunday. He said no.
I'm merely asking a simple question. Did they ask you any questions, and did you give them any answers on the substance? Not whether you could be questioned or not, but did you ever answer any questions? In other words, did they interview you at all?
Actually, there was a record of there was a record of interview, but at that time I told them to wait until 12 or so, but they could not wait, so they left.
Okay, thank you. Now, finally, I want to, in keeping with this third interview, I want to get your comment on this document, D243/4. It's dated 13 January 2010. It's an order from the International Investigative Judge, Judge Marcel Lemon. And on the last page, in English, which is 4, Khmer is 00439922, French 00485281, and in English 00429022. Judge Lemon says the following. This is in paragraph 11, the last part of it. In October 2009, Kim Vun was approached by the CIJs in order to conduct a third interview to canvass the very issues raised in the co-prosecutor's request. However, despite the previous 2 interviews, the witness at this stage became wholly uncooperative and refused to be interviewed further, and thus the interview was not able to be conducted. Here you're being characterized on that 3rd interview as being uncooperative and refusing to answer any questions, to be interviewed. Does that correspond with your memory of the events as you experienced them and as you have already described them to us?
Actually, the incident was as what I described. I think that if they adopted a proper conduct, I would be happy to work with them, but I found them were rather rude. And if they found me uncooperative, I strongly deny that. Of course, we cooperate with the public organization or the court, but he did not even have the patience to wait for me, even if I told them that I was busy. And I know that in the court there was a mixed composition of national and international staff, and I did tell the investigator that if the international investigator could not wait, then at least the Cambodian investigator be there to take the statement, because they could do the job rather than simply listening to his counterpart. And I think that this was a unsubstantiated allegation against me that I was uncooperative. I have no authority whatever to go against the court. The court was established by the law. But that was because he was unhappy with me, and I do not accept this observation about my cooperation with them. I know that he must have been upset with me. That was because of his immoral words, as you have just described. That's why we failed to cooperate with him. I simply asked him to wait. He could not even wait for me. President, that's enough, and that was the working procedure in the Office of Co-Investigating Judges. And once the closing order was done, that was complete in that phase, so we do not need to dwell on this.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was merely pointing out some of the problems, again, with this particular witness and the summaries. Sir, I have no further questions. On behalf of Mr. Ingsari, Mr. Angodam, and I would like to thank you for coming here to give your evidence, and we wish you safe travels and the best of luck. Thank you.
The President. Thank you, Counsel. Thank you, Mr. Kumwon. Your testimony has come to a conclusion, and you are now excused. You may feel free to go back home. The Chamber would like to express our great thanks to you for giving up so much of your time and travel all the way from your place to give testimony before the Chamber. You have been very patient, and we really appreciate that. Your testimony will contribute to the ascertaining of the truth before the Chamber. We wish you good luck and all the best and safe travel back home. Court officer is now instructed to assist Mr. Kumwon with coordination with the West unit so that Mr. Kumwon can be returned home safe and sound. You may go now. Thank you very much indeed. Next, we would like to proceed to listen or to hear the testimony of TCCP 28 before we adjourn for lunch. Court officer is instructed to bring in the civil party TCCP 28 to the courtroom, please. Mrs. Sai Golwati, could you please go and call the civil party into the courtroom? The President, good morning, civil party. You have already been briefed on how to use the microphone when responding to questions posed to you by parties and the member of the bench to you. You are only to respond to any of the question when you see the red light being activated on the console right before you. Otherwise, your voice can never be heard or be rendered into English and French. We hope you understand this already. So when speaking, you should observe a pause and wait until you see the red light. Then you can proceed with your response. Mr. Civil Party, what is your name? Response. I'm Un. Question. Do you have any other alias or other names other than I'm Un? Response. People also call me Iep Lon in the revolution. The President, please repeat that name. Response. I never used that name again. In the revolution, I was known as Iep Lon. The President, thank you. How old are you? Response: I am 61 years old. Question: Can you tell the court your birthplace? Where were you born? Response: Good morning, Mr. President. Morning, Mr. President, and Your Honors. I would like to respond as follows. I am Am Eun. I was born in Tropang Tlauk, Chiech, Commune, Komchai Mir District, Prevang Province. The President: Where do you live now? Response: I live in Chuk Saw Village, Don Tây Commune, Ponyia Kraik District, Kampong Cham Province. Question: What do you do for a living? Response: I am a peasant. I do farming as well. Question: From the 17th of April 1975 until the 7th of January 1979, where did you live and what did you do? Response: Mr. President, I may have to apologize because I may only be brief on this, as I may have forgotten something concerning the events. The President: Indeed, you can be brief. Just tell the chamber what you did during that period and where you lived. Response: During this time, from the 17th of April 1975, and before that, I was a doctor. After 1975, I remained a medical doctor. I worked at Sector 20. I had been in medical training sessions in Phnom Penh at the 7th of April Hospital. Question: What is your father's name? Response: My father's name is Uj Saam. Question: What about your mother's name? Response: She is Iep Sran. Question: What is your wife's name? Response: She is Sum E. I would like to also clarify on this before I was asked question. I got married twice. I got divorced with my first wife, whose name was Ong Naing, and I remarried. The previous wife was in Kampong Cham, but the current wife in the Chuk Saw Ponyia Kraik district, Kampong Cham. Question: How many children do you have? Response: I have 3 children. The President: The lead co-lawyer for the civil parties, you may now proceed, but please make sure that you follow internal rule. And according to the internal rule 91, civil party lawyers are allowed to put questions to Mr. Am Eun before the other parties. Mr. Pek Ang. Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honors, and everyone in the courtroom. Mr. Kum Ming Ki will be putting questions to the civil party, and I will also put some questions, and Mr. Christine also will be putting some questions as well if needed. The President, indeed, you may now proceed. Counsel Kum Ming Ki. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Your Honors, and good morning to everyone, and very good morning to Am Eun. I am Kum Ming Ki, representing you. I belong to the the Lawyers Without Border, and I am representing you in case file 002. And before I proceed to ask you some questions, I would like to also take this opportunity to briefly tell you about your rights. Before this chamber, you have the right to be heard. You can describe the account, the events you saw, you witnessed during the Khmer Rouge regime, and you also have the right to express your emotion and seek reparation. The President intervenes. Counsel, you may now proceed to put question to the civil party. Indeed, that position could have been taken by the President of the Chamber, although the President of the Chamber has not yet informed the party, the civil party, of this, but it was done intentionally because the Chamber would not wish to make the civil party be confused. We would like to make sure that now questions concerning the substantive matters as laid out in the closing order be put to the civil party. First, Counsel, thank you, Mr. President, for the clarification. Before this my client asked me a very surprising question, whether he should take an oath or not. That's why I would take that opportunity to brief him on his rights. And if I did that inappropriately, I would apologize for that. Mr. Am Eun, in 2010, you filed an application. Could you tell the court about your application, why you filed it rather late? Response. Mr. President, the reason that it was filed belatedly because at the beginning I did never know about this. I listened to the radio broadcast, but I did not know how my application could be filed. Question. Thank you. Later on, you lodged your complaint, and on 2 occasions you filed the forms. First on the 25th of 2010, and the second one is on the 29th of January 2010. We would like to know how you lodged this application on 2 occasions rather than once. Response. The reason why I filed my complaints on 2 occasions as follows. However, before I respond to any of the questions, I would like to also tell the court that I have some sore throat and that's why I will have also some problem concerning the clear voice in my testimony. However, whatever I will be responding will be the truth. Counsel, please address me as the counsel, not the judge. Response. It was belatedly submitted because first I filed a complaint concerning the veracity of the process of the court, and later on I was asked that I could file another complaint because I could be heard before the chamber, and I was not properly educated. So I wrote in my application, but my wordings were not properly put. That's why I asked the DC CAM to help, or the center to help me fill my application form. And for that reason, it was rather late already in its filing. Question. You stated in your complaint already. However, I would like you to briefly recollect your history, your activities before, after 1975. Tell the court where you lived, what you did. Response. Prior to 1975, the 17th of April, I already stated in the application form. Now allow me to elaborate on that. I never went to school to attend any formal education sessions. However, I wanted to learn about things. My parents were very poor, and I am the child who had to be responsible for feeding my parents. I came to work as a porter in Phnom Penh for that. Counsel, thank you. How old were you when you came to Phnom Penh as a porter? Response. I came to Phnom Penh as a servant. I stayed with my grand-uncle, and I started to acquire some medical skills because my grand-uncle was a doctor. I could learn from him to become a doctor. First, I was asked to start treating general patients who were inpatients at that time. Question. How long were you involved in the study, medical study, and how old were you back then? Response. It is difficult to remember the exact date. However, I can describe the probable date when I studied that medical matter. I learned from my grand uncle. At that time, I was about 10 years old. Counsel, you may continue your question to me. Counsel. You said you were about 10 years old, so it was perhaps in 1960s. What about in 1965? Could you tell us what you did then? Response. After acquiring some medical skill, learning on the job from my grand uncle, at that time the country was in war. The Khmer Rouge was in control of power, or was about to take control of the country, and my grand uncle was very worried, so he let me home. My father was the leader of the Khmer Issarak movement, and he would like me to be to work as a servant to assist my grand uncle so that I could learn from him. However, my grand uncle, who learned that the war was nearing and that when families members were living in different locations, we would never meet, so he allowed me to go back home and reunited with my parents. After leaving Phnom Penh, I was back at home feeding my family and parents. Again, my father used to be the senior person in the Issarak movement. And later on, the Khmer Rouge learned that I was the son of a doctor, a family who had history or who had skills in medicine. So I was asked to work for the Khmer Rouge. And later on, the Khmer Rouge noted that my skill was not good enough to put to use. And after consultation with my father, I was allowed to go to training sessions in Vietnam under the direct order from Mr. Sao Pham, the Secretary of East Zone. Council, thank you, but I may need some clarification on the dates. You said that you attended training session in Vietnam with the Viet Cong. How old were you when you studied medical or medicine? And how old were you when you returned to the country after the study sessions? Response. Again, I cannot be precise on how old I was back then, but I can say clearly that I was younger than 20. I studied medicine and treated patients, and at the same time feeding my parents, and the Khmer Rouge War was intensified. And my father asked me to work as a medical doctor with the Khmer Rouge. I started working as the medical doctor at Sector 20 under the supervision of Comrade Kham. I do not know his family name. I only know him by the name of Kham. He was also the secretary of that sector. Question: when you studied medicine in Phnom Penh, did you acquire a certificate of completion after the course or not? Response: I went to Phnom Penh on 2 occasions. First, I went to Phnom Penh when I was young and I learned to become a medical doctor, learning on the job. And later on, I went to attend training sessions under Khmer Rouge. After leaving Vietnam, my father and Ta Sao Pham and Ta Kham asked me to work as a medical doctor for the sector. And so far as I remember, at that time I was about 20, 21, or 22, or 23 years old. And I'm very sorry if I can't precisely say the exact age, but that's the true story of me. Counsel: thank you, Mr. Subupati. Mr. President, I have noted that it is already 12 o'clock. Should I continue putting some questions, or should we observe an adjournment for lunch first? The President: thank you, Counsel. Thank you, Mr. Am Eun. Indeed, it is an appropriate moment for lunch adjournment. The chamber will adjourn until 1:30. Court officer is now instructed to assist civil party during this break and make sure that he is returned to the courtroom when the next session resumes. It is 1:30 p.m. indeed when he is returned. Counsel for Mr. Noon Chia, you're on your feet. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our client would like to follow this afternoon's proceedings from his holding cell. He is suffering from a headache, back pain, and a general lack of concentration, and we have prepared the waiver.
The President: the chamber has noted the request of Mr. Noon Chia through his counsel, in which he has requested that he be permitted to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the remainder of the day due to his health reasons. The chamber therefore grants such request. Mr. Noon Chia is allowed to observe the proceedings from his holding cell for the remainder of the day, and he has expressly waived his right to directly participate in the courtroom. The chamber would like counsel for Mr. Noon Chia to submit the waiver signed or given thumbprint by Mr. Noon Chia to the chamber in due course. Every booth officers are now instructed to ensure that the audio-visual link is connected to the holding cell so that Mr. Noon Chia can observe the proceedings from there. Security personnel are now instructed to bring Mr. Noon Chia and Kyew Sampon to their respective holding cell and have Mr. Kilsampon return to the courtroom when the next session resumes. The court is adjourned.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោយឈរ